What's up, everybody? Tim McDonough from Aim High Training Solutions, back with part 2 of our data-driven feedback video. In our last video, we talked about the feedback process and how to give it the schedule that you should utilize when producing feedback. Now we're going to talk about developing those data points to make sure that you have concrete information when you are giving feedback to your team. And if you have that concrete information, how it's going to help you have a stronger foundation to increase the efficiency and productivity of your entire staff. So let's get into it. So the first thing that Aim High Training Solutions does when we start developing your training plan for your employees is we develop a task listing. So what the task listing is a list of all the tasks that your staff needs to do on a regular basis to be successful in your company or to make your company operate in a successful way. All right? So first bullet, it allows the employees to see what tasks match their job title. The task listing should be, if you have the stock clerk, accept the deliveries, check the inventory, stock the shelves, front the merchandise. Those types of things would apply to a stock clerk position in your company. If you're the cashier, how to ring up a sale, how to ring up a return, how to open your drawer and close your drawer, how to log into the point of service terminal. Those things would correlate to a cashier. So it's just an entire listing of all the things that it takes to do that job in your company. And then the other thing we do with the task listing is we make them into a hierarchy. So they should be listed in progression as our next bullet. So what that means is that you should take those steps that they should be learning first and make them the initial part of your task listing, the first things that your stock clerk or your cashier are going to develop. And then as they become proficient in those tasks, that'll lay a foundation for them to excel on the tasks that are more difficult or the more complicated tasks down the line to make them successful and make you successful at the end of the day. Should clearly define how to promote in your business. The task listing is that hierarchy ladder. It's the ladder that shows the employee how to go from that stock clerk day one to I'm the best stock clerk in the world, and now it's time for me to move on to cashier, or however you establish your positional hierarchy in your company. A task listing is something that's very, very critical when it comes to your feedback points, because this is going to let them know, hey, you could do this on a percentage basis. When you do feedback with your employee, you sit down and say, look, here is what 100% of a perfect stock clerk should look like at my business. Right now, you have 50% of those items completed that we think you're proficient in. You're 6 months in, that's great. You were doing a great job. You're ahead of schedule. Let's see how quickly we can get you to 100% with maintaining the proficiency, the standard that you expect from them. So what does a task listing look like? I'm going to give you a few examples of what Aim High Training Solutions does when we develop a task listing for you. So the first example, perform all opening procedures with 100% accuracy. If you see what we do here is we give a behavior that your employee needs to perform, and we give a standard that they have to perform into. If they can't match that standard, then they don't get to be signed off on your task yet. And that's what gives you the credibility in concrete data-driven feedback. If it's not to the standard that you set forth, then they don't get signed off on that task. And that lets them know where they stand in your business. Next one, use a point of service terminal to issue a refund with no assistance. Again, you see it. I'm telling you, use the point of service terminal to issue a refund. That's the behavior I want that person to do. That's the behavior that your company wants. This is correlated to the task. The task is issue a refund. We take that task, we turn it into a behavior. Use a point of service terminal to issue a refund with no assistance. Again, standard. They got to do it perfect or else they don't get signed off on the task. The standard can be whatever you want. If you allow your standard to be, hey, I'll help you out 2 times, okay, with 2 assists. If you don't have to do it 100% every time, okay, with 90% accuracy, or with 80% accuracy, or whatever you determine is acceptable for your business. These are just examples. I like perfection, that's why I put 100%. But if it's not necessary, you just change the standard to whatever it is you need. Last one, document employee counseling with stated corrective action plan with no more than 2 errors. The same task listing, the same steps, can exist for your higher level employees. We're talking about your supervisors or your managers, the people right below you or somewhere in that chain of command. They're going to document a counseling form. Maybe your employee was late for work. Maybe their drawer was short. Maybe they mouthed off to a customer or they did something inappropriate in the store. Whatever the failure of behavior is, you need to correct it, right? So employee counseling with stated corrective action plan. I'm going to counsel my employee. I'm going to tell them, here's what you did wrong. Here is the plan that we're going to have in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. We'll get into that later in a different video about how to establish a corrective action plan. There's going to be a whole nother video on that topic coming down the road. With no more than 2 errors. So what that's saying is that your supervisor, your manager, is going to write up the corrective action plan, write up the counseling form, they're going to bring it to you. And then you're going to say, okay, let's make this adjustment, let's make this adjustment, or you did this part wrong, you did this part wrong. As long as they can do it with no more than 2 errors or 2 assists from you as the owner, then they're doing that task proficiently. You can sign that supervisor or that manager off on counseling your employees. Think about how effective that would be if you had a documented form or a documented concrete step that lets you know you can count on your supervisors to effectively counsel your staff the same way that you would want them to counsel, or the same way that you would counsel. That's gold right there for you, right? You have data-driven, concrete feedback. When you get time to do your annual review with that supervisor or that manager, you can go right to the task listing for that job title and say, here's where you stand, here's what 100% is, let's work on this gap in the middle, this is what you're doing excellent, and this is where I want to see you improve. It's no longer just picking things out of the air. This is long-lasting. This is business-changing type stuff when you have data-driven feedback. So in my first video, we talked about the feedback schedule. We talked about how to give feedback to your employees. And this one, we're talking about how to have that data-driven aspect. So why is data-driven feedback important? Why is it so critical that the information that you give to your employees, when you provide them feedback or when you provide them information on how they're doing, why is it important that you have something backing that up? When tasks are listed as behaviors, it makes feedback easier. Again, I've said this a couple times already, but this is where you say, here's 100% of what your job title should be able to do. This is where you're at in that list. It's clear as day. That employee has no questions moving forward of where do I stand and where can I go? How do I get to the next level? Nobody wants to stay stagnant. If you have employees that want to stay stagnant, you need to work on that staff. Maybe turn them over, hopefully not, but you need to work on that staff because everybody in your staff should be driven towards achieving a new standard, achieving a new goal. If they're staying in one place, your business is staying in one place. And that's not what you want as the business owner. Too often employees don't receive feedback. I was in a Best Buy a couple weeks ago buying a new laptop for the business, and I was just talking to the person up at the register, and they were telling me, they were relatively new, been there less than a year. I said, how many times has somebody, supervisor, manager, come over to you and actually sat down and gave you a structure of, hey, this is where you stand, this is what you're doing well, this is what you can improve on? He's like, I have no clue. I watched a couple training videos when I got hired, and then I just, boom, I'm out on the floor. And I got to figure it out on the fly. I haven't gotten feedback. I think I'm doing all right. You know, and just had a conversation with that person and found out he's not receiving feedback on how he's performing. So what does he know? He has to assume, the only thing he assumes, no news is good news, right? Same thing, we talked about this. If the doctor doesn't call you back after the test results, everything's good. No news is good news works the same way when you're giving feedback to your employees. If you're not telling them what they're doing, they think they're doing great. At this next one, feedbacks are generally not based off of concrete performance standards. This is one of the biggest ones. This is actually the reason for this whole two-part series, is so often feedback has no basis on a task listing or a performance or an expectation or a standard that you're clearly setting for your employees or documented for your employees. They just assume everything's great, and then they get to the annual feedback or whatever feedback they are getting, and they find out they're the worst employee in your company. Your employee is sitting there thinking, where's the data? Show me, prove it to me. They don't want to fail. They want to succeed. They want to be successful. So they want to know how. Just show me the data so I know how to use that data to make me better. You have to have a standard. You have to have a task listing. You have to have job titles with job descriptions, and that's fantastic, but it needs to go deeper than that. Beyond that job description, you need to have a task listing that shows them how to do the job description. One step to the next step to the next step, and eventually you got that high-performing employee and your business is flying. All right, another reason that data-driven feedback is important is because it removes a lot of the errors or the biases that exist in us as individuals. And we're going to get into a few of those now. So the logical fallacy. The logical fallacy is correlating, they did one thing well, so this other totally unrelated thing they're probably excellent at also. So you don't check. With the task listing, with data-driven feedback, you are going to be able to remove that fallacy, remove that bias, and say, here is the step they should be able to do. Let me test them and see if they can do that step. And when you find out they can't, that's fantastic. That is a training opportunity for you to increase the effectiveness of your staff and increase the profitability of your business. All right, halo effect is the next one. And halo effect is different than logical fallacy because while logical fallacy, you're still correlating tasks, you're still basing it off of their performance, you're taking performance in one task and correlating it to an unrelated task. So that's logical fallacy. Halo effect is where you are solely basing your review of this person on their personality. Maybe it's your friend that you hired in the business and they've been with you for a few years and they're slacking off, but they're your boy or they're your best friend or they're your girlfriend or whatever it is. And it's not based on performance, it's based on perception of that person, how they make themselves relatable to you. Halo effect is that good old boys club. You know, you got the leader that's got his couple subordinates that he really likes, so they seem to always get the promotion or anything like that. That's all halo effect. Again, data-driven feedback removes that from reviews because it's based off of a standard that everybody in that job position has to meet. Doesn't matter if it's the dude who grew up next to you or the girl who grew up around the corner from you or anything like that. It's the same standard for everybody in that job. That's how you get rid of halo effect. Unconscious bias. Simply put, unconscious bias is you judging people based off of your experiences throughout your life, good, bad, or indifferent. But if you have a data-driven feedback, if you have a set of here is the behavior, here is the standard, are you meeting it, are you exceeding it, or are you falling short of it, it makes it more possible to remove unconscious bias in your feedback. So regardless of what you think, unconscious bias is real, unconscious bias is fake, whatever side of that you line up on, data-driven feedback removes that decision-making point. Just have the feedback, have the data to support it, and you don't have to worry about any of that. It's straight to the point. Here's the standard, you're short, or you're exceeding. Congratulations, or here's where we improve. And the last barrier that we're going to talk about is central tendency. So central tendency is where you look at your staff as a whole and you rate them all the same. You could say, hey, they're all outstanding, or hey, they're all terrible. Whatever it is, you just lump them all in together. The issues that arise with that is if you assume that everybody is an elite employee, obviously that's not true. But let's say you make that assumption. You are going to give an overwhelming workload to your lower performing employees. And when they're not able to handle that workload, you just get mad, you fire them, you move them around to someplace else that's less effective in your business. You don't realize that they're capable, they just need to learn it at a slower rate than your high performers. And then the same thing works inverse. If you assume that you have a garbage staff, hopefully you don't assume that, hopefully your hiring practices are effective, but if you just look at your staff and you're like, wow, my staff is really bad, I think they're all terrible and I don't know what to do, you are going to give a low workload to your low performers. So they might be okay, but your high performers are going to be bored. Your high performers are going to be ineffective because you're not challenging them enough to excel to the level that they're capable of excelling to. So that's where central tendency comes in. It's either overloading your poor performers or not challenging your high performers enough. Either one is ineffective for you. All right, a couple more whys for you before we close out. It gives employees a clear pathway to success. A task listing, a data-driven feedback where you have evidence to prove what you tell your staff, allows the employee to know very clearly where they stand and how to achieve the next level. Again, you should not be looking for employees in your business that just want to be the cashier and stay there forever. You should always be looking for that opportunity to have an employee grow out of that and move up in your company. That's how you're going to have company growth, business growth, by making sure your employees are always looking towards that next objective. It encourages them to achieve without the need for constant motivation. We talked about this in our first video. You want a driven staff, not a motivated staff, because a motivated staff is something you're going to have to remotivate on a regular basis. Where a driven staff, you can still motivate them, you can still hype them up, obviously. You're a business owner, you're the leader, they look for that sometimes. But a driven staff is going to be able to motivate themselves to achieve the goals that they have because they know that their goals align with your business goals and that you will support them in achieving their personal goals in your business. All right, so to recap, our last video, we talked about feedback. We talked about the schedule of feedback, the quarterly, semi-annual, and annual feedback sessions. We talked about how to give it, how to talk to your employees, and how to encourage them to excel. And then in this video, we talked about the actual data portion of it. We talked about the task listing. We talked about why it was important to develop a task listing, how a task should be written. Remember, you have a behavior. The task that they need to perform is turned into a behavior, and then a standard is associated with that behavior. so that you know, hey, this is how well you have to do this task. Then we talked about some of the barriers, removing the barriers that data-driven feedback does. Removes the biases that exist without us even knowing that they exist. And then we talked about a couple more whys, motivating your staff, keeping that driven staff moving forward, giving that clear pathway to the next objective. And that's what data-driven feedback is all about. Allowing your staff to know how to get to the next level, and then they will strive for that themselves, which allows you to have a tremendous amount of business growth when you have an effective and efficient staff. So thanks again for stopping by. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so that you always see our content first, so that you can stay ahead of the game. Give us a like, give us a comment down below, let us know what topics you would like to see us cover in future videos. Share this video with your friends, with business owners that you know, managers, supervisors, even teachers, educators. All of them can benefit from this type of information. Hopefully this video can give them an opportunity to take some tasks or take some behaviors that we talked about and apply them into their daily operations, regardless of what business or what industry they're operating in. Make sure you go to aimhightrainingsolutions.com so you can schedule your appointment so that we can come in and we can talk about how we help you achieve your goals. We're the guide for you. You're the hero in your story. We're just the guide that helps you get there. And as always, don't be afraid of new heights. Aim high. Have a great day.